Vampire alien girl was dying of thirst, shocked when the human offered his neck. The crystalline halls of the Galactic Council's diplomatic vessel, Aurora, hummed with an ethereal resonance as Edward Stone adjusted his sleek, black stealth armor. As the human assistant to Ambassador Black, he'd grown accustomed to the peculiarities of interstellar politics, but nothing in his extensive training had prepared him for his current assignment, or his striking new partner. Balara Nightshade stood before him, her pale silver skin almost luminescent under the ship's ambient lighting. Her very long, straight white hair cascaded down her back like a frozen waterfall, and those mesmerizing silver eyes seemed to pierce right through him. The black strapless corset she wore left little to the imagination, though Edward maintained his professional demeanor with practiced ease. "Mr. Stone," she purred, her voice carrying an otherworldly melody, "I trust you've been briefed on our mission parameters?" Edward nodded, running a hand through his dark tousled hair. "Escort duty for the Centaurian delegation. Should be straightforward enough." He stroked his short, dark beard thoughtfully. "Though I admit, I'm curious why they assigned a hemivore to this particular detail." Balara's lips curled into a subtle smile. "My people prefer the term sanguine, and we're not the monsters your ancient Earth legends would have you believe. Our synthesized sustenance has made us quite civilized." "Never suggested otherwise," Edward replied with a roguish grin. "Just noting that your particular skill set seems a bit excessive for a simple diplomatic escort." Their conversation was interrupted by the ship's HFY. "Attention, unauthorized vessel detected on approach vector. Security protocols engaged." Edward's hand instinctively moved to his pulse pistol as the ship's lighting shifted to a deep crimson. "So much for straightforward," he muttered. The next few hours were a blur of tactical maneuvers, intense negotiations as they dealt with what turned out to be overzealous corporate spies trying to gather intelligence on the Centaurian trade agreements. Through it all, Edward couldn't help but notice how gracefully Balara moved, her enhanced abilities making her seem almost ethereal in combat. It wasn't until they were securing the last of the intruders that he noticed something was wrong. Balara's movements had become jerky, less coordinated. Her silver skin had taken on an ashen quality. "When was the last time you fed?" Edward asked quietly, ensuring they were out of earshot of the others. Balara's silver eyes widened slightly, a flash of vulnerability crossing her features. I forgot my supply in the rush to respond to this assignment. I thought it would be a quick mission, but now..." "How long can you go without?" 3 days maximum, like humans without water." She straightened her posture, trying to maintain her dignity. "I'll manage." Edward did some quick mental calculations. They were at least 4 days from the nearest supply station. He looked at her, then at the secured prisoners, then back at her. "Take mine," he said simply. "What?" Balara stared at him in shock. "My hemoplasm. It's not synthetic, but it'll keep you alive." He tugged at his armor's collar. "We barely know each other, but I'm not about to let my partner die from something so easily preventable." "You don't understand what you're offering," she whispered, but her silver eyes had darkened with hunger. "Direct feeding. It has effects." "Side effects? I could become aggressive," Edward shrugged. "Then we'll deal with that when it happens. Right now you need to feed, and I'm offering. Simple as that." Balara took a hesitant step forward, then another. "You're either the bravest or the most foolish human I've ever met." "I get that a lot," Edward replied with a slight smirk. Just try not to make too much of a mess. This armor was expensive." She placed one delicate hand on his shoulder, the other tilting his head to expose his neck. Her breath was cool against his skin. "This will hurt," she warned. "I figured it might." "Aha!" Edward tensed as her fangs pierced his flesh. The initial sharp pain quickly gave way to an odd sensation. Not quite pleasure, not quite pain, but something in between. He could feel his heart racing, pumping his life essence into her. After what felt like both an eternity and no time at all, Balara pulled away. A drop of crimson stained her lower lip, and her silver eyes had taken on a predatory gleam. She licked her lips slowly, deliberately. "That was..." She paused, searching for words. "Different. Stronger than the synthetic compound. Much stronger." Edward pressed a hand to his neck, feeling the small puncture wounds. "Good different?" or bad different? Before she could answer, alarms blared again. Additional hostile vessels detected. All security personnel to battle stations. Billera's head snapped toward the sound, a low growl emanating from her throat. Her muscles tensed visibly, and Edward could see the enhanced aggression she'd warned about taking hold. "Well," he said, drawing his weapon, "looks like we'll get to test those side effects sooner rather than later." The Aurora's corridors echoed with the sound of plasma fire as Edward and Lyla moved in perfect synchronization. The mercenaries had breached multiple sections of the ship, their black combat suits bearing no insignia, professional killers for hire. "8 hostiles, forward section," Lyla growled, her enhanced senses heightened further by Edward's hemoplasm coursing through her system. Her silver eyes had taken on a predatory gleam, and her movements were more fluid, more lethal than before. Edward noticed how she positioned herself slightly in front of him, protective despite, or perhaps because of, their recent hemoplasm sharing. "You don't need to shield me," he said, adjusting his grip on his pulse pistol. "I can handle myself." Ballara's response was cut short as 3 mercenaries rounded the corner. She moved with supernatural speed, her martial arts amplified by the fresh human hemoplasm in her system. Edward watched in fascination as she disarmed the first attacker, using his own weapon to incapacitate his companions. "Show off," Edward quipped, but his smile faded as he noticed her hands trembling slightly. "Ballera, you okay?" "Your hemoplasm," she whispered, pressing a hand against the wall to steady herself. "It's intense, more potent than anything I've experienced. The aggression is difficult to control, but there's something else." She looked at him, her silver eyes darkening. "A pull toward you." Edward felt his heart rate accelerate, and not just from the combat. The way she looked at him now was different. Hungry, but not just for hemoplasm. "Ballera, we should focus on—" An explosion rocked the ship, throwing them both into a maintenance alcove. Edward found himself pressed against the wall, Ballara's body flush against his. The close quarters made him acutely aware of her every breath, the subtle tremors running through her frame. "Your heart rate has increased," she murmured, one hand resting on his chest. "Are you afraid?" "Not of you," he replied, his voice rougher than intended. "Never of you." The moment stretched between them, charged with something that transcended species barriers. Ballara's fingers traced the puncture marks on his neck, her touch sending electricity through his nerves. "I can smell your arousal," she said matter-of-factly, her alien directness both disconcerting and oddly arousing. "It's distracting." "Probably not the best time to discuss this," Edward managed, though he made no move to push her away. "We have mercenaries to deal with." "Yes," she agreed, but remained close, though I find myself wondering if all humans taste as compelling as you do. "Planning to find out?" Her eyes flashed. "Number just you." The possessiveness in her tone sent a shiver down his spine. Another explosion reminded them of their situation. They separated, reluctantly, both breathing harder than the situation warranted. Edward checked his weapon's charge while Lyla scanned the corridor ahead. "The mercenaries are converging on the bridge," she reported, "but there's something else. Their hemoplasm, it smells wrong, enhanced somehow. Combat drugs? More sophisticated than that. They've been modified specifically to fight my kind." She turned to him, her expression serious. "They knew I would be here. This isn't random." Edward processed this information. Anti-human extremists with anti-vampire tech? That's a nasty combination. "They underestimate us both," Lyla said, a dangerous smile playing on her lips. "Your hemoplasm has made me stronger than they could anticipate. And you." She stepped closer again, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You're unlike any human I've encountered." The tension between them crackled like static electricity. Edward found himself reaching for her, his hand cupping her face. Her skin was cool to the touch, but he could feel heat building wherever they made contact. "When this is over," he said quietly, "we should talk about whatever this is between us." "Talk?" She arched an eyebrow, pressing slightly into his touch. "Is that what humans typically do in such situations?" Before Edward could respond, the ship's AOI blared another warning. "Hull breach detected in sections 7 through 9. Emergency protocols engaged." They separated again, but something had shifted between them. Every glance now carried weight, every accidental touch sparked with possibility. ready to show these bastards why you don't mess with a hemoplasm-charged vampire and her partner? Edward asked, checking his weapons one final time. Balara's smile was predatory. Partner? Is that what we're calling this? We'll figure out the terminology later, preferably somewhere private. They moved out together, their growing attraction adding another layer of complexity to an already dangerous situation. The mercenaries ahead had no idea they were facing opponents bound by something stronger than duty, a connection forged in hemoplasm and strengthened by an attraction that defied conventional explanation. The Aurora's emergency containment protocols activated with brutal efficiency. Massive bulkheads slammed down throughout the ship's sections, isolating the hull breaches and, inadvertently, sealing Edward and Balara in the ship's auxiliary control center. Environmental system stable, Edward announced, scanning the readouts. But we're locked in until the main computer verifies atmospheric integrity. Could be hours. Balara prowled the perimeter of the room, her enhanced senses alert for any threat. The mercenaries are still out there. I can hear them trying to bypass the security protocols. The room's emergency lighting cast everything in a soft blue glow, highlighting the silvery sheen of Balara's skin. Edward found his attention drawn to the way she moved. Fluid, predatory, yet undeniably alluring. Your heart rate is elevated again, she observed, pausing her patrol to study him. But there's no immediate danger. Isn't there? Edward challenged softly. The confined space seemed to amplify the tension between them. You're still processing my hemoplasm. How's that aggression working out for you? Balara's silver eyes darkened as she approached him. The aggression has evolved, changed into something else entirely. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Something I've never experienced with synthetic sustenance. Care to elaborate? She reached out, trailing cool fingers along his jaw. Your hemoplasm carries something our synthetic compounds can't replicate. Emotion, desire. Her touch lingered on his pulse point. Life itself. Edward caught her hand, holding it against his skin. Is that why you keep looking at me? Like you want to devour me? Not just your hemoplasm, she admitted, stepping closer. Everything. Your strength, your courage, your humanity. Her free hand traced the contours of his armor. Do you know how rare it is? A human willing to offer their hemoplasm to save one of my kind? Seemed like the right thing to do at the time, Edward replied, his voice rougher than intended. Though I'm starting to think it might have complicated things. Balara's laugh was low and musical. Complicated? Is that what humans call this primal attraction between us? A distant explosion rocked the ship, but neither of them moved apart. If anything, the danger outside only heightened the intensity of the moment. My people, Balara continued, we don't waste time with uncertainty when attraction presents itself. Life is too precious, too finite, even for those who live centuries. And what about the effects? Edward asked, though his hands had found their way to her waist. The hemoplasm bond we've created? It's more than just hemoplasm now. She pressed against him, her coolness a stark contrast to his rising temperature. Your offering changed everything, started something unprecedented. Their lips met with an intensity that surprised them both. Cool met warm, alien met human, and the universe seemed to hold its breath. When they parted, both were breathing heavily. The mercenaries, Edward managed, though his hands refused to release her. Can wait, Balara finished, her silver eyes now almost black with desire. We have hours until the lockdown lifts, and I find myself hungry for something other than hemoplasm. What followed was a discovery of differences and similarities, of alien grace and human passion. Their coupling was both tender and fierce, a dance of opposing natures finding harmony in shared desire. The emergency lighting painted their union in shades of blue and silver, creating an otherworldly tableau of interspecies intimacy. Hours later, as they lay entwined on the emergency bedding they'd fashioned from storage supplies, Balara traced patterns on Edward's chest. Your heart, she mused. It beats differently now, stronger, like it's trying to match my rhythm. Edward pulled her closer, marveling at how natural it felt. Is that normal? For your kind? Nothing about this is normal, she replied, but her tone was wondering rather than concerned. The hemoplasm bond, the physical connection, It's creating something new. Something neither of our species has experienced before. Another explosion, closer this time, interrupted their moment. The mercenaries were getting closer to breaching their sanctuary. "They won't stop," Lyla said, rising gracefully and beginning to dress. "Not until they've eliminated what they see as a threat to their worldview." Edward followed suit, checking his weapons. "And what threat is that exactly?" "Us." She helped him secure his armor, her touches lingering. "The possibility that humans and my kind could be more than just allies. That we could, She paused, searching for words. "Bond?" Edward suggested, pulling her in for one more kiss. "Create something new?" "Exactly." Her smile turned predatory, ready to show them how dangerous that combination can be. The lockdown alerts began flashing, indicating imminent system restoration. Soon they would face their pursuers again. But something fundamental had changed. They were no longer just partners thrown together by circumstance. They were something new, something unprecedented in the annals of both their species. As the bulkheads began to rise, Edward and Lyla stood ready, their bodies in perfect fighting alignment. The mercenaries waiting outside had no idea they now faced opponents bound by hemoplasm, passion, and something that might even be love. The battle through the Aurora's corridors was unlike anything Edward had experienced before. He and Lyla moved as one entity, their newfound intimacy translating into lethal efficiency against the mercenaries. But something was different about Lyla's fighting style, more fluid, yet somehow more restrained. "You're holding back," Edward observed after they cleared another section. "What's wrong?" Lyla pressed a hand to her midsection, her silver eyes clouded with confusion. "Something feels, different. My body is changing in ways I don't understand." Before Edward could respond, she suddenly staggered, catching herself against the wall. Her pale silver skin had taken on an almost pearlescent sheen, and her temperature, normally cool to the touch, had risen noticeably. "The medical bay," she gasped. "We need to—" Edward caught her as her knees buckled. Without hesitation, he scooped her into his arms, noting how she felt both lighter and warmer than before. The nearest medical facility was 2 decks up, through territory likely crawling with hostiles. "Hold on," he murmured, activating his armor's stealth systems. "I've got you." Their journey to the medical bay was a tense dance of avoidance and silent takedowns. Edward moved with practiced precision, his enhanced armor allowing them to slip past most of the mercenary patrols. When combat was unavoidable, Lyla would stir in his arms, her innate combat instincts fighting against whatever was affecting her. Finally reaching the medical bay, Edward sealed the doors behind them. The facility's automated systems hummed to life, scanning Lyla as he placed her on the diagnostic bed. "Your cellular structure is realigning," the medical AI announced, its tone carrying an unusual note of surprise, detecting unprecedented genetic modifications at the molecular level. Lyla's eyes widened. "Impossible. Our species aren't compatible for genetic hybridization in progress," the AI continued, "human DNA successfully integrating with sanguine cellular matrix." Edward took her hand, feeling the unusual warmth of her skin. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm pregnant," Lyla whispered, awe and fear mingling in her voice. "But it's impossible. Our species have never shared hemoplasm and joined in the ancient way," Edward finished, remembering their passionate encounters. "Never created a bond like ours." The medical scanners continued their analysis, projecting detailed holographic images of the changes occurring within Lyla's body. The hybrid embryo was developing at an accelerated rate, already showing signs of both species' unique characteristics. "The child will be the first of its kind," Lyla said softly, her free hand resting on her abdomen. "Neither fully human nor fully sanguine." "Your people won't accept this," Edward stated, his jaw tightening. "Is that why those mercenaries are really here? The purists among my kind? They fear change, fear diluting our bloodline." She pulled him closer, her silver eyes intense. "But they don't understand. This child, this union, it's not dilution, it's evolution." A sudden impact rocked the medical bay, sending equipment crashing to the floor. The mercenaries had found them. "We need to move," Edward said, helping Lyla to her feet. "Can you fight?" She straightened, and Edward saw something new in her stance. a protective ferocity that went beyond mere combat training. "They threaten our child," she growled. "What do you think?" The medical bay's doors began to glow red as the mercenaries attempted to cut through. Edward and Balara took up defensive positions, their bodies automatically moving in sync. "Any other surprises I should know about?" Edward asked, checking his weapons charge. "Other than the fact that I'm going to be a father to the first human-vampire hybrid in history?" Balara's laugh was both dangerous and delighted. "The pregnancy is accelerating my abilities. I can feel it. Strength, speed, senses, everything enhanced." She cast him a sideways glance. "Your hemoplasm did more than save my life, Edward. It gave us, a future neither of our species thought possible." The doors began to give way, and Edward felt a surge of protective instinct that matched Balara's own. They weren't just fighting for themselves anymore, but for something unprecedented, a child that represented the best of both their species. "Ready to show these purists what evolution looks like, me?" he asked, his fingers steady on the trigger. Balara's response was to pull him in for a fierce kiss. "Let them come," she whispered against his lips. "They have no idea what they're facing." As the doors finally breached, Edward and Balara stood ready, their bodies aligned in perfect combat stance. They were no longer just partners, lovers, or even mates. They were the harbingers of a new era, protecting a future that neither of their species had imagined possible. The mercenaries poured in, weapons charged, but they hesitated at the sight before them. Balara's silver skin glowed with an inner light, her enhanced abilities radiating power, while Edward's steady presence complemented her supernatural strength with human determination. Together, they represented everything the purists feared and everything the future promised. The battle in the medical bay revealed something extraordinary. As Edward and Balara fought off the mercenaries, her transformation accelerated. Her silver skin began emitting pulses of bioluminescent light, and her movements became impossibly graceful, even by sanguine standards. "Your life signs are extraordinary," the medical AI commented during a brief respite. "The hybrid pregnancy is triggering unprecedented genetic adaptations." Edward watched in amazement as Balara's wounds from the fight healed almost instantly. "How do you feel?" "Powerful," she breathed, examining her glowing skin. "Like I'm becoming something entirely new." Her silver eyes met his, now streaked with hints of human brown. "Your hemoplasm, our union, this child, they're changing me at the molecular level." A mercenary burst through their defenses, but before Edward could react, Balara moved. Her speed had doubled, maybe tripled. She disarmed the attacker with one fluid motion, then used his own momentum to incapacitate him without killing, a level of control she'd never possessed before. "That's new," Edward observed, impressed. "The old you would have torn his throat out." "The old me didn't carry the future inside her," Balara replied, resting a hand on her abdomen, or understand what it means to be both predator and protector. The medical SCI continued its analysis, detecting emergence of hybrid organs. "Your body is developing the ability to process both synthetic sustenance and alternative nutrition sources." "Alternative nutrition sources?" Edward raised an eyebrow. "You mean I won't need to choose between synthetic compounds and hemoplasm?" Balara realized. "I'm adapting to process both. Evolution is giving our child and me the best of both worlds." Their moment of discovery was interrupted by a ship-wide announcement. "Attention! Sanguine High Council vessel approaching, preparing for emergency docking." Balara's expression darkened. "They're coming for us, for the child." She turned to Edward, her new eyes intense. "Our baby threatens everything they've built their society on. The carefully controlled synthetic sustenance, the strict genetic purity." "They're afraid," Edward understood. "This pregnancy proves that evolution doesn't care about their carefully maintained status quo." "The changes in my body?" Balara moved closer to him, her enhanced senses drinking in his presence. "They're not just physical. I can feel things differently now. Understand emotions in ways my people never could. Your humanity is becoming part of me, just as my strength is becoming part of our child." Edward pulled her into an embrace, marveling at how her cool skin now carried hints of human warmth. "So what's the plan?" "We can't fight the entire High Council. No, she agreed, a sly smile playing on her lips. But we can show them something they've never seen before. She guided his hand to her abdomen, where their child's accelerated development was already creating a slight swell. A perfect fusion of human and sanguine. Living proof that evolution favors adaptation over isolation. The ship shuddered as the High Council vessel initiated docking procedures. Edward and Lyla shared a look of understanding and determination. They'll try to separate us, he warned. Study you, probably terminate the pregnancy. Let them try. Lyla's voice carried a new authority, backed by her evolving powers. This child is more than just our offspring. It's the next step in both our species' development, a bridge between worlds. The medical AI interrupted. Warning, multiple armed parties approaching medical bay, hostile intent detected. Edward checked his weapons while Lyla stretched, her new abilities humming beneath her skin. Ready to face the old guard, my love? She asked, the term of endearment falling naturally from her lips. With you? Always, he grinned. Besides, I think it's time your council learned why humans have a reputation for turning impossible situations into victories. Lyla pulled him in for a passionate kiss, her enhanced senses memorizing every detail of his taste, his scent, his essence. When they parted, her eyes glowed with both power and love. You know, she mused, when you first offered your neck to save my life, I thought you were either insane or suicidal. Her hand traced the long-healed puncture marks. Now I understand you were just being perfectly, wonderfully human. The medical bay doors began to shake as the council's forces attempted to breach them. Edward and Lyla took up defensive positions, their bodies moving in perfect sync. Human and vampire, partners and lovers, soon to be parents of a revolution. Ready to show them what humanity's really capable of? Edward asked, his finger steady on the trigger. Lyla's response was a predatory smile that somehow managed to convey both fierce love and deadly intent. My dear Edward, I think it's time to show them what we're capable of together. The medical bay doors exploded inward with enough force to shatter reinforced steel, but Lyla was ready. Her newly evolved abilities manifested in a brilliant display of power, a shield of pure energy that protected both her and Edward from the blast. Impossible, breathed the lead council member, an ancient sanguine named Elder Thane. His aristocratic features twisted in shock as he observed Lyla's transformation. Those are progenitor abilities. They've been lost to our kind for millennia. Lyla's body pulsed with otherworldly light, her silver skin now threaded with luminescent patterns that seemed to tell an ancient story. Edward stood beside her, his presence somehow amplifying her power. Progenitor abilities? Edward questioned, his weapon trained on the council forces. Elder Thane's eyes narrowed. The original powers of our species, before we engineered ourselves into dependency on synthetic sustenance, before we abandoned our true nature in favor of civilization. He spat the last word like a curse. The medical database is updating, the AI announced, correlating genetic markers with ancient Earth records. Match found, proto-human DNA sequences dating back 50,000 years. Lyla gasped as new knowledge flooded her consciousness. We were there, she whispered, on Earth, before recorded history. We weren't aliens at all. We were Earth's first vampires. A branch of humanity that evolved differently, Elder Thane confirmed reluctantly. We fled Earth when primitive humans grew too numerous, too dangerous. We engineered ourselves away from our predatory nature, created the synthetic sustenance to free ourselves from the need to hunt. But you lost something in the process, Edward realized, the true potential of your species, which my pregnancy is now reactivating, Lyla added, her hand protectively covering her abdomen. Our child carries both the original vampire genes and modern human DNA. It's not just creating a hybrid, it's restoring what was lost. A surge of power coursed through her body, causing the medical equipment to short-circuit. Edward caught her as she stumbled, and where their skin touched, energy crackled. The transformation is accelerating, the AI warned. Genetic reversion to progenitor state, 67% complete. Elder Thane raised his hand and the council forces leveled their weapons. You don't understand the dangers. The progenitors were too powerful, too unpredictable. We engineered ourselves into dependency on synthetic sustenance, specifically to control those abilities. Control through weakness, Edward scoffed. Typical bureaucratic thinking. Lyla straightened, her eyes now swirling with ancient power. "You're right about one thing, Elder. I am becoming unpredictable." She raised her hand, and every weapon in the room disassembled itself at the molecular level. "But you're wrong about the danger." The display of power left everyone stunned. Edward felt pride surge through him. This magnificent being carrying his child was rewriting the rules of what was possible. "The progenitors weren't dangerous," Lyla continued, new understanding flooding her mind. "They were guardians, protectors of both species. The synthetic dependency wasn't about civilization, it was about control, about keeping us from our true purpose." She turned to Edward, her expression softening. "When you offered your neck, you did more than save my life. You awakened something that's been sleeping for 50,000 years. Their eyes met, and in that moment, their bond deepened beyond physical attraction or even love. They were part of something ancient and powerful, a reunion of two branches of the same evolutionary tree. Elder Thane stepped forward, his authority crumbling in the face of Lyla's transformation. "The Council will never accept this. The implications are exactly what both our species need," Edward interrupted. "A return to strength, but tempered by humanity's evolution, the best of both worlds." Lyla's power surged again, but this time it was controlled, purposeful. The patterns on her skin formed intricate designs that Edward recognized from ancient Earth cave paintings. "I understand now," she said softly, "why I was drawn to you from the beginning, why your hemoplasm affected me so differently." She took his hand, placing it over their growing child. "We're not creating something new. We're remembering something ancient." The medical AI's voice cut through the tension. "Warning, subject's genetic transformation approaching critical threshold. Progenitor restoration, 89% complete." Edward pulled Lyla closer, feeling the power thrumming through her body. "Whatever happens next," he whispered, "we face it together." Her response was to kiss him, and the energy surrounding them intensified, creating a display of light and power that forced everyone else to step back. When they parted, Lyla's eyes held both ancient wisdom and modern love. "Together," she agreed, "just like our ancestors, before fear drove them apart." The medical bay filled with swirling energy as Lyla's transformation reached its peak. The future of both species hung in the balance. But in that moment, all that mattered was the truth they'd discovered. A truth that began with a simple offer of hemoplasm and ended with the reunion of humanity's divided children. The medical bay erupted in blinding light as Lyla's transformation reached its apex. Her body, now a perfect fusion of ancient progenitor power and modern evolution, pulsed with energy that seemed to resonate with the very fabric of space. "Final stage of genetic reversion complete," the AI announced, detecting unprecedented cellular stability. Edward watched in awe as Lyla's form stabilized, her silver skin now permanently marked with luminescent patterns that told the story of both their species. But something else was happening. Her abdomen had grown visibly, the accelerated pregnancy reaching a critical point. "The child," Elder Thane breathed, his previous hostility replaced by wonder. "It's time." Lyla's eyes met Edward's, now a perfect blend of silver and brown. "He's coming," she whispered. "Our son." The next hours were a blur of ancient power and modern medicine, as Lyla's fully awakened abilities helped her body adapt to the unprecedented birth. Edward never left her side, their bond growing stronger with each passing moment. "I can feel him," Lyla gasped between contractions. "He's perfect, both human and progenitor, but something entirely new as well." The medical AI's sensors were going haywire, recording energy signatures that defied classification. "Detecting genetic stabilization cascade. The infant's DNA is rewriting itself." Elder Thane stepped forward, his expression reverent. "The child isn't just hybrid, he's the template for our species restoration." As if in response to his words, Lyla's body released a pulse of energy that spread throughout the ship. Every sanguine aboard, from the council members to the mercenaries, felt something ancient stir in their hemoplasm. "The synthetic dependency," one council member gasped. "It's dissolving." "Not dissolving," Lyla corrected, her voice strong despite her labor. "Evolving, just as we should have done millennia ago." The birth itself was remarkably quick, guided by progenitor instincts and powers that had lain dormant for 50,000 years. When their son finally arrived, his first cry carried both human passion and sanguine strength. "Nixian," Lyla breathed, cradling their child. "His name is Nixian." Edward touched his son's face gently, marveling at the perfect blend of their features. Nixian's skin had a subtle silver sheen, and his eyes shifted between human brown and sanguine silver as he looked at his parents. "He's broadcasting some kind of energy signature," the AI reported. "It's affecting all sanguine life signs aboard." Elder Thane nodded, his own skin beginning to show faint traces of ancient patterns. "The child is a catalyst. His very existence is awakening our dormant abilities, but..." He paused, amazed. "Without the savage hunger of our ancestors? Somehow he carries the perfect balance." Lyla smiled knowingly. "Because he was conceived in love, not necessity. Born of choice, not survival." She looked at Edward with pure adoration. "Your humanity tempered our predatory nature. Your hemoplasm awakened our true potential." The council members watched in astonishment as their own bodies began to change, ancient abilities returning, but controlled by modern consciousness. The synthetic dependency that had defined their civilization for millennia was being replaced by something new, something better. "The factories," one council member realized, "we won't need them anymore. But we'll keep them," Lyla declared, her voice carrying new authority. "As a choice, not a chain. Our people will be free to embrace both aspects of their nature, just as I have." Edward sat beside her on the medical bed, one arm around her shoulders as they both gazed at their son. "So what happens now?" "Now?" Lyla smiled, leaning into his embrace. "Now we reshape both our societies. Show them that evolution isn't about losing what we were, but gaining what we can become." Nixian cooed, his tiny hand grasping Edward's finger with surprising strength. The touch sent a spark of energy through both parents, a reminder of the power their union had unleashed. "The council will need guidance," Elder Thane admitted. "This change, it's more than we ever imagined possible." "Then it's fortunate," Lyla replied, her eyes twinkling, "that we have a rather unique family to show them the way." As if understanding his role, Nixian's body flickered with gentle light, his hybrid nature already displaying remarkable control over abilities that had once threatened to tear their species apart. "You know," Edward mused, "when I offered you my neck that first time, I didn't exactly expect to end up helping restart an ancient species." Lyla's laugh was musical. "And I never expected a simple diplomatic mission to lead to all this." She kissed him softly, their connection sending ripples of power through the room. But then again, humans do have a reputation for making the impossible possible. 6 months after Nixian's birth, the Aurora had become both a home and a symbol of the new era. The medical bay, once a scene of confrontation, had been transformed into a nursery that merged human comfort with sanguine elegance. Edward stood at the observation window, watching the stars drift by while holding his son. Nixian had grown remarkably fast, already displaying the physical development of a human toddler. His silver-tinted skin glowed softly in the starlight, and his ever-changing eyes tracked the passing celestial bodies with unusual intelligence. "He's getting stronger," Lyla observed, entering the room in a flowing gown that complemented her evolved form. "I felt him projecting dreams last night. He was showing the entire deck what Earth's sunrise looks like, through your memories." Edward turned, still amazed by how his wife's transformation had enhanced her natural beauty. The luminescent patterns on her skin pulsed gently in response to their proximity, a visible sign of their unbreakable bond. "Clever boy," he murmured, kissing Nixian's forehead, already breaking down barriers between species. Their son giggled, releasing a small burst of energy that made the ship's lights flicker. His powers were developing in ways neither parent had anticipated, combining human creativity with progenitor abilities in entirely new forms. "The Council's integration program is proceeding better than expected," Lyla reported, moving to embrace both her husband and child. "More sanguines are choosing to explore their restored abilities while maintaining their civilized nature. They're calling it the balanced path." "Following our example?" Edward asked with a roguish grin. "Following our sons," she corrected, though her eyes sparkled with affection. "He's living proof that passion and control aren't mutually exclusive." As if to demonstrate, Nixian reached out and touched both his parents' faces. Instantly, they were flooded with his emotions. Pure love, untainted by prejudice or fear, bridging the gap between their species with childlike simplicity. That's new, Edward breathed, amazed by their son's growing abilities. He's evolving faster than anyone predicted, Ballora agreed. The perfect synthesis of human adaptability and progenitor power. Their family moment was interrupted by Elder Thane's arrival. The ancient sanguine had become their strongest ally, his own transformation giving him a new perspective on change. The first generation of naturally born hybrids is showing similar gifts, he reported, his own skin now marked with restored progenitor patterns. The children are teaching us things about our own abilities that we'd forgotten millennia ago. Nixian reached for the elder, who had become something of a grandfather figure. When they touched, another wave of energy pulsed through the ship, but this time it carried images of a possible future, one where humans and sanguines lived in harmony, their strengths complementing rather than opposing each other. Remarkable, Elder Thane whispered. He sees so clearly what we spent centuries fighting against. Ballora took Edward's free hand, their fingers intertwining naturally. Sometimes the clearest path forward requires a step into the unknown, she said softly. Like offering your neck to a starving vampire. Edward pulled her closer, remembering that first fateful moment. Best diplomatic crisis they've ever handled. Their kiss was interrupted by Nixian's delighted laughter and another burst of power that made the observation window's force field shimmer with aurora-like colors. The Council has officially recognized your family as the template for our species' future, Elder Thane announced. They're calling it the Dawn Protocol, the voluntary evolution of both races toward a shared destiny. Voluntary being the key word, Edward noted. No one should be forced to change. But they'll want to, Ballora predicted, watching their son create tiny constellations of light between his fingers. When they see what's possible, how could they not? The stars beyond the window seemed to pulse in response to Nixian's powers, as if the universe itself was acknowledging this new chapter in evolution. And Edward reflected on how a simple act of compassion, offering his hemoplasm to save Ballora's life, had cascaded into something that would reshape two species. You know, he mused, humans have legends about star-crossed lovers changing the world. I never thought I'd actually live one. Ballora's laugh was pure joy. My beloved human, you've done more than that. You've changed two worlds, maybe more. She touched the fading marks on his neck where she'd first fed. And it all started with an offer that shocked me to my core. Speaking of cores, Elder Thane interjected with unusual humor, your son appears to be redecorating the ship's quantum matrix. Indeed, Nixian's latest burst of power had transformed the standard emergency lighting into an artistic display of swirling energies that somehow made the ship's systems run more efficiently. That's my boy, Edward said proudly. Breaking the laws of physics before he can walk? He gets that from your side, Ballora teased. Humans never could resist doing the impossible. As their family stood together, watching their son reshape reality with innocent wonder, Edward realized they'd created something greater than either species could have achieved alone. Their love story, begun in crisis and forged in defiance of convention, had opened a door to possibilities that would echo through generations. The stars continued their eternal dance outside the window, witnesses to a new chapter in the cosmic story. One where love proved stronger than biology and hope overcame fear. And at the center of it all, a child born of both worlds showed the way forward, one impossible miracle at a time.